Hey everyone, it's Caleb and welcome to your Django course. This video is going to give you everything you need to know to start building websites using Python. Now, that's exactly what Django is. It's a web framework to allow you to build websites and APIs, which you can think of as websites, but instead of presenting a web page, they present data. So the Python is used for the back end. For the front end, you'll still need some HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We'll touch on that some in this video, but this is primarily going to focus on that back-end side of the website. I really like using Python for web development. However, if you're not familiar with Python, as you go through this course, you might need to pause and go research any of the Python concepts a little bit and then come back. However, in most cases, you can probably just follow along and learn that Python on the fly. So don't worry if you don't have a ton of Python experience, you should be pretty good to go. Just follow this course, and if you struggle with anything, just rewatch that section. And with that, let's just jump in and get started. So what we're going to need is we're going to need to create a directory for our project and then create what's known as a virtual environment, which I'll explain how that works, and it'll get you started creating Python projects the correct way. So we're going to start with just a terminal, and what we need to do is we need to make sure we have Python installed. So you can say Python 3 -- version, and we get Python 3.9.9. I think .10 is out too. The exact version doesn't have to be the same as mine here, but you do want to make sure you get Python 3. Now, as for setting this up as well as getting other tools you'll need, you can follow my video Python environment setup for Windows, Mac, or Linux. We also have a backend bootcamp course coming out soon, so if you want early access to the notes for free, you can check those out in the pinned comment. We have this setting up development environment, which you can see all the steps to getting started. So that and much more will be found in the course, and that's all I have for advertisements. Let's go ahead and get back to what we were doing. So we'll go ahead and create a directory, mkdir, and we're just going to call this movies. You can assume we have a project to store movie information, and then what we'll do is we'll open this directory in an editor. So I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code, and from here you can open folder, and then select that movies folder we just created. And from here we can actually open a terminal inside of Visual Studio Code, so all of our terminal commands can be issued right here. We no longer need this separate terminal window. So what we'll do is we will close this out, and we're going to issue some commands to start our project. Now, the very first thing you want to do is you want to create a virtual environment, and this is a very important step. Let me explain a little bit how it works and why you might want to use it. You can think of a virtual environment as a lens on how to look at our project and what packages we have installed. Let's say you had two different Python websites and they use different versions of different packages. Well, the way you say which package versions should be used for which application, you do that through a virtual environment. If you don't use a virtual environment, then your computer is going to have these packages installed and the same version will be used across all of the applications. So let's just go ahead and start with a virtual environment just to get everybody on the same page. So to create a virtual environment, you can say Python 3-m venv, which is the virtual environment tool, and then the name of the virtual environment, venv, with a dot at the beginning. I like to put a dot there. That's how you create a hidden directory, and it also is a way to clearly tell people that the content of this folder is not meant to be touched, so just ignore it. We'll go ahead and hit enter, and we don't get anything in the terminal, but if we look at our files, you can see we have this new virtual environment directory, and it has a few directories inside of it. The next step is we activate the virtual environment. So first we create it, then we activate it. The way we do that is with dot space dot venv, the name of our virtual environment directory, /bin/activate. Hitting enter, it's going to put in parentheses .venv at the beginning of this prompt. And going back to the example of a virtual environment being a lens on how we look at our project, you can think of this being, we just put that lens on, we put the glasses on, and now the packages we install are just for within this virtual environment. It's a pretty strange concept at first, but once you do it enough times, it's just kind of second nature. So go ahead and follow along with that. And what we can do now is we can install packages. So we can say pip install, and then the name of a package such as Django. So pip is the package tool for Python. And Django is obviously the framework we're going to be using for web development. So we'll go ahead and hit enter, does some downloading. It also installs some other packages you can see here. And we should be able to see those over in our virtual environment directory. So we can go ahead and see inside of here all the different packages we have installed. Another way that you can see this is by saying pip freeze. And that's going to return all the additional packages. So whatever this is right here, and then Django, and SQL parse. Now to illustrate what it'll be like if we didn't use a virtual environment, we can deactivate the virtual environment to basically exit, to escape that lens of how we're looking at our project. And we can do that with the deactivate command. That's going to remove that venv at the beginning. And now when we say pip, for one, we'll probably have to put a 3 after it. So pip 3 freeze. So it's going to change the commands a little bit. And you're going to get a different list of packages. So these packages are what I have installed globally on my machine. When you're working in a team environment, we don't want mismatched versions of different packages. So that's where the virtual environment comes in. We can activate it and then use just the packages needed for this project. So that's what that is listed there. All right, so that's enough on that. So let's go ahead and activate it again. So .venv bin activate. Okay, that is how you create a virtual environment and activate the virtual environment. Whenever you're working with this Django project, you will want to make sure you are within the activated virtual environment for things to work properly. It'll also change your commands a little bit, so you can say Python -- version instead of having to leave that 3 on at the end, and pip -- version, and you don't have to put a 3 on that either. Cool, so we have the virtual environment. Now we need to create a Django project. So to create a Django project, we say Django admin, and we'll just say -- help. And this will show us some of the different commands that we can create. The one we're interested in is start project. So we'll go up, Django admin, start project. We're going to name this movies, and it's going to be located in the current directory. That's what the dot here represents. Hit enter. Now check out our files. You can see beyond the virtual environment directory, we have this movies directory, and that's going to have some stuff inside of it here. Now, when you look at your directory structure, you'll see we have 2 movies directories. We have this main large movies directory, and that's just the directory we created to store everything. And then we have movies again. And you'll see this structure a lot. It's kind of strange. But when we create our project in the current directory, it's going to create a new movies directory. It just so happens that the directory we're working in is also called movies. You'll see similar structure elsewhere, such as from the documentation for Django. We are within a my site directory, and then we have another my site directory, where the outer my site is a container for your project, and then the inner my site directory is the actual Python package for your project. The outer directory doesn't have to be named the same thing. You can rename it to anything you like, but just following typical conventions here. So let's go ahead and get back to where we were. Now that we have the Django application created, what we can do is we can add everything to source control, which I believe is a good first step. So after you create the virtual environment and get the initial project set up, you can add a Git repository. So to work with Git, obviously you'll need to get it installed, but that's kind of out of the scope of this video. Just go install Git, Git. You can get Git at git-scm.com and then download for whatever operating system you're on and go through that installation process. Once you have it installed, you should be able to say git -- version and get some version. So once we have Git installed, we can say git init. And this is going to initialize an empty Git repository. You'll be able to see that inside of the Explorer. We now have this green color saying that these files are being watched. And in Visual Studio Code, you can see there's a source control tab with 5,652 pending changes. Well, we don't necessarily want to check in every single thing into our repository. We only want to check in the essential stuff that cannot be regenerated. So think of the repository as just a store of all the most essential files. So to ignore certain things, such as everything inside of this virtual environment, you can create a new file, which is called a .git ignore. And anything inside of here will be ignored, such as the .venv file. And we can save that, and you can see the color of the .venv directory changes to gray, and the total file changes is now only 7. So we can take a look at those, and these are all the files that would be checked into our repository. Now there's going to be other files we want to ignore, so what I recommend is to actually use a much more thorough git ignore that you can find on the internet. So I like the git ignore found from toptool.com, so we'll go ahead, copy this, select everything, and we can replace everything in this file, paste it here, save, and that's going to ignore the virtual environment. You can see somewhere in here there will be a .venv as well as a lot of other variations you'll see inside of Python. So that'll get all of those, but it'll also get a lot of other stuff as well. So any kind of build files or caching stuff, there's some Flask stuff, and you can get a pretty good idea of the kind of stuff we don't want to check into source control by looking through this file. Such as, here's another one, the SQLite 3 database when you start working with databases. So at this point we have the git ignore. What we can do now is make our first commit. You can do it through the GUI using this source control tab. Just add each one of these files and then create a message. However, I'm going to do it through the terminal. So to do that, what we can do is say git add and then the current directory, and then git status, and it'll say changes to be committed. You can see all of these new files. We'll say git commit -m for a message, initial commit. Now when we hit enter, it will make that commit. If this is your first time using Git, you might get a complaint about setting your username and email. You'll want to go through those instructions to be able to commit properly, but I already have that all set up. So now when we say git log, you can see that commit, and this is just a more organized way to keep track of our code. So what I will end up doing is taking this code and putting it up on GitHub. So in GitHub, we can create a new repository, and we'll just call this YouTube Django course. And I'm just going to leave this on public. Don't check any of these things as we already have a repository locally, so we'll create the repository. And we'll go ahead and copy these lines here and paste them in the terminal. That's going to push everything up to GitHub. So now when we do a refresh, you can see our files are here. Now, if you want to make sure you have the same code as me, you can go to this URL and access any of these files, as well as checking the commit history to see older versions of the files as you go through this course. Because when you go here, I might be farther along than you are. You can also make pull requests or branches if you want to suggest any changes or whatever it might be. Alright, so that seems to be pretty much it for all the accessory stuff. Now at this point, we have a good project, we have it up in source control, and we're ready to start doing the Django stuff. So let's first take a moment to learn the main concepts of working with Django. The way you structure Django applications is split up into 3 main sections, and these sections are the model, the view, and the template. So you often hear MVT. I would have chose to call it MTV, but we'll just go with MVT. So the model is a representation of your data. The view is what accepts requests and gets the appropriate data. And then the template is the visual page, the structure of that data being sent to the client. So you can literally think of it as a template, and then you just fill in pieces of information. You know, if you want to display a movie, you might have the title, the description, and whatever else it might be associated with that movie, and you can define that structure in a template. So those are the 3 pieces. Just a quick review. We have the model, the view, and the template. The model is the structure for our data, the view takes requests, and the template is the visual structure for that data to be sent to the client. You can see that same structure in the documentation in the way that they teach it. They start with the models, and then the views, and the templates. So to do the equivalent of a hello world in Django, what we're going to do is we're going to create the most basic view that just responds to a request. So what that means is we need to figure out how to get our server running, how to send the request, and how to respond to the request. So let's get started. So to get started with our first view, let's first take a look at what already exists, and that is the admin page. So if you open up movies and you go into URLs, you'll see this URL pattern, admin, and this is going to give the admin site. We'll talk a little bit more about the admin site soon, but the essentials here is that this path is attached to the URL of our website, and it's going to return something. And we can continue that structure to create our own paths. So to see this in action, we can start a local web server to see our Django site. To do anything when it comes to managing our server, we're going to use this manage.py file. And it's going to look like this. We're going to say Python manage.py and then run server. Hit enter. We're going to get this message in red here. You have 18 unapplied migrations. This has to do with the models. We'll get to that soon. But in the meantime, it created a development server and it's located at 127.0.0.1:8000. So from Visual Studio Code, you can hold Command and click. I'm assuming Control click if you're on Windows, and that's going to bring up our website homepage. And we can visit that admin path by putting /admin. Visiting this, we get an error, no such table. We're going to talk about fixing that later. This has to do with the same problem we got with those red messages saying that we have unapplied migrations. We haven't created the database tables yet, and that's fine for now. I'm just trying to show you that you can create a path and have it go somewhere. So what we can do is we can create a new path, and inside of here, we could say movies. Now, as for where this is going to go, well, we haven't actually created that view yet, but it's going to look like this. Views.movies. And this views is going to come from another file that we import. So we'll say from movies import views. So we're going to end up creating a views file that we import here. So let's go ahead and do that now. We'll right click movies, create a new file, and we'll call this views.py. So here's where we're going to define all of our views. And a view is just a function. So to create a function in Python, we'll say def, and then the name of it, such as movies, parentheses, colon. And this is going to return something. And it's going to return what's known as a HTTP response, which is going to be imported. And it looks like it gives us that suggestion. We'll select that there. So from django.http, import HTTP response. And then inside of parentheses, we can just put a message, hello there. So that is our first view. The only other thing is that inside of here, we're going to take an argument. And this is going to be called request. You can name it whatever you want. I'm going to call it that. But the first argument is going to refer to the request. So that is how we create our first view. And now we can save and make sure we don't have any errors in our terminal down here. So it looks like it was imported good and everything is good to go. Now let's go check this on the web page to make sure it's working. So instead of admin, we're actually going to go to /movies, and you can see we get the message, hello there. So we created a URL path and we said what view to hit, and this is the response. So let's go through that process one more time. Here's the path, movies. It's going to hit the movies function inside of our view, which will take a request and return an HTTP response. Let's try this again with another view. Let's create another one here. We can just call it home. We'll take a request and we'll just do something similar. So we'll say HTTP response and we'll just say homepage. Save that. Now from the URLs, we can add a newer URL to the homepage, and that's just going to be an empty string here, and we'll return views.home, put a comma afterwards, save. Now what we'll do is we will visit the home page by removing movies, And you can see we have the Get homepage now instead of that default Django web page. So we created our very first view. The only thing it does though is just return a very simple string. If we had more complex data, well, we would want to be able to customize the way that's displayed on the page. And this is done with the template. So we created a view, now let's create our very first template. To do this, we tell our view to render a template. So let's go back to our code and we'll jump into the views. And for this movies here, we are going to execute a function called render. And this is going to come from Django.shortcuts, import render. So this is going to take 3 arguments. The first is just passing along the request. So just copy this here, paste it there. The next thing is the actual template itself. So this will be inside of a string. And we haven't quite created that template yet, but I'll show you the exact path that we want to put it at. We want to put it at movies/movies.html. And I'll show you exactly what that looks like here in a moment. But just to fill this in, we'll start with that. And then a comma, and then some data. So what is this data going to look like? Well, we can just start with a very simple dictionary here. And let's just say movies, we'll make a list. And we'll just put some strings in here, movie 1, comma, another string, movie 2. So this here, this dictionary, is the data that's going to be passed to the template. So let's go ahead and create that template now at this path. So it's going to look a little strange, but what we're going to do is we're going to create a new folder in here called templates. And then inside of templates, we're going to create a new folder, movies. And then inside of that directory, a new file, whatever you want to call it, such as movies.html. So the nesting is a little strange here because now we have templates movies. However, for name spacing, this is important so we don't have conflicts for our templates. You might see that more as you get into more complex applications. Now inside of this template, you can render data that was passed to it inside of double curly braces. And we'll just say movies. So going back to the views real quick, you can see the data is called movies. So that's what we will put inside of this template. Now this is an HTML file, but it's actually going to be processed. So this is going to change a little bit once it reaches the browser. There's just one more thing we have to do. Inside of settings, we need to scroll down and you'll see this installed apps. Go ahead and add a new value here, movies, followed by a comma here. And that will allow Django to find your template. All right, so let's try this out. We'll go to our website, go to /movies, and you can see here is our list of movies. So that was a lot. Let's just do a quick review of everything we did. Starting with the views, we use this render function. Inside of here, the first thing is we just pass the request. The second argument here is the template to render. And you can see we qualified it with the directory. So that's where this movies directory here comes in. And then the data, or what you often hear as the context, this is what's passed to that template to be rendered. If it's easier to see, you could separate this out. So we could say data is, and then create the dictionary here, copying the insides here, pasting that, and then we could just pass data to the movies template. And that should work exactly the same way. And then just to wire things up, you just have to add your app to the settings.py so it knows that this is included in your project. So this works, but the data is extremely simple. We just have a list of strings saying movie 1, movie 2. More than likely, if you're working with movie objects, they're going to be a little bit more complex. So what I want to do is show you how you can work with more complex data, and this can easily be replaced with data retrieved from a database. So let's get back to it. What we're going to do is we're going to go into our views, and we're just going to modify this mock data here. And instead of just having a list of strings, what we'll do is we'll have a list. So we'll space it out a little bit. But inside of this list, we're going to have more dictionaries. So we'll have one dictionary here, and then another dictionary here, and then a third dictionary down here. So this is the structure. Now we just need to fill it in with some information. Let's just say that there is an ID, and we'll just give this a number value such as 5. The movie will have a title, Jaws, maybe a year it was published. I can't remember exactly. I think it was like 1669 or something. And that'll be good for now. We'll just copy this structure for the next ones and then just change the data a little bit. So we'll have an ID of 6. Sharknado. And what do we want to do for the last one? We'll go with The Meg, which is another shark movie. All right, so we have 3 things here. Now we have an error. Let's just check what's going on. I think I'm just missing some structure here. I see. I just forgot the commas. So just add some commas after the data. There we go. All right, no more problems. Looking good. And we can save this, go back, do a refresh. You can see all of that data here, but it's not presented in a nice web page. This is exactly what the client's going to see. So if we want to do a little bit more templatizing, we can go over to our template and start doing some customization. The very first thing we can do is actually loop through the list of movies. To do that, instead of using double curly braces, you're going to do single curly braces and %. So an opening and a closing one. This is the structure we're going to have. And you'll say for, give some variable name such as movie in movies. And then what we actually do is we end the for as well, which is probably unique if you've never done any template engineering stuff before. You may have not had to end your loops, but for this we will need to tell it when to stop the loop. And inside of here is everything that we're going to do each iteration of the loop. So to access some data on the element such as movie, you could say movie.title. All right, so let's try that out. We'll go back to our web page, do a quick refresh, and you can see Jaws, Sharknado, The Meg. So it does appear to be working. Basically, it iterates through each movie in the movies list and displays the movie.title. Now, the magic of this templating is that you can mix it with HTML, which is why the syntax is a little bit funny, because you have to be able to tell when you're doing HTML versus when you're doing Python. But for example, what we could do is say H1 movies, and then what we could have is an unordered list, and we'll surround this entire for loop, and for each movie, this can be a list item. So it'll look like this. There we go. We'll save that, go do a refresh real quick, and we have movies, Jaws, Sharknado, The Meg, but now the format is a lot better. So when we right click view page source, this is what the actual HTML structure sent to the client is going to look like. As you can see, we don't have this syntax here, like these curly braces and parentheses, show up in the HTML because that template is rendered before it's sent to the client, and all that stuff is replaced with HTML. But you will notice it doesn't have the full HTML structure, so you might need to add a little bit to this for it to be proper HTML. So if you want this to be proper HTML, we just need to add a little bit here. So we'll say doc type HTML. We will have the HTML tag. That's going to surround everything. So we'll move that to the bottom. And then we will have the head. And then we will have the body. And the body is where all the HTML is going to go. So we'll put that here. And then we just have to do a lot of cleaning up because it's getting a little sloppy. So we'll just auto format that. That's some extension magic if you want to try that out. It was this prettier extension. So you can try that out if you want, or you can just format it like this. And inside of the head, what we can do is we can create a title. We'll just call it movies, and that's what's actually going to show up in the tab. So when we go back to our web page, do a quick refresh, you can see it shows up as movies up here instead of just the URL, which is nice. It's also probably best to put the character set. I'm not sure if this is entirely required, but I'm just going to do it anyways. Char set equals UTF-8. I don't think that needs to be self-closed. This is a more appropriate HTML structure. This is also your chance to include any CSS classes on any of these elements. Do as you wish, and then you can attach the appropriate CSS files as well. So, like I said, we're not going to get into a ton on the front end in this video, but now you have a pretty good idea of how the HTML is supposed to be structured, and that'll get you going in the right direction. So we created a basic view, we created a basic template. We're just using mock data though. So how do we actually create real data? We use models. So that's what we're going to try and do next. And this has to do with the migrations errors we were seeing earlier. I'm going to explain what all of that means. So I just committed all of the changes up to this point with this commit message if you want to compare any files. I just did this in a new terminal tab, so I still have the old server running in this other tab over here. But on this one, when you scroll up, we get this message, 18 unapplied migrations. Migrations represent changes to a database. Think of if you wanted to migrate a database from one computer to another. It allows us to move around databases without keeping track of a bunch of SQL create statements. It's all done automatically for us through migrations. So there's 18 existing migrations that are there by default when we create a new project. So what we can do is we can apply those migrations to actually create those tables. So we can keep this server running if we want, and in a new window, we can issue the different commands. Now, if you want, what you can do is you can actually split these into two sections somehow here, magically. There we go. All right, so now we have the terminal over here and the terminal over here. Here's the server, which is continuing to run, and then we can issue new commands here. So the command we want to execute is python manage.py migrate. Before we do that, I would like to just activate the virtual environment just to make sure everything is the same. So .venv bin activate python manage.py migrate. So that's going to apply all the migrations. You can see we got a bunch of OKs. Everything seems to look good. So this will actually allow us to now access the admin page. So we tried to visit this earlier and we got an error, but now when we visit admin, you can see we get this login page. And to have a user to sign in with, you need to create it. So over here in the terminal, we're going to type python manage.py create super user. And I'm going to scoot this over just so we can see it a little bit better. Hit enter. Username, we're just going to go with admin. Just some email, it doesn't really matter for this case. Although you'll probably want to put your email there. Maybe there's functionality to reset your password or anything like that. And we're just going to set the password as password. And this is going to say this is too common and you can bypass this if you want. I'm doing that now just for learning's sake here. So this is going to allow us to log in with username admin and password. When you log in, you're going to see site administration with this section saying authentication and authorization. And it says if you hover models in the authentication and authorization application. So as you create new apps, they'll be grouped in these different tables. These are the default tables. So we have a users table and a groups table. These are created with those migrations, and you can go into users and you can see our new user that we just created here. And you can open it and see a lot more information as well as a hashed password. So the actual password value is not stored in the database. Rather, the password is hashed and then checked against the hashed value in the database. So what we will want to do is we will want to add all of our tables we create to this admin panel so that we can easily execute CRUD operations such as adding data or changing data. So for example, the ability to create a new user or to go into an existing user and change that. This will be really handy when we're working with custom data for movies. Now this is all stored within an SQLite database and you can see that in our files. db.sqlite3. This is a fine database for learning, but eventually you might want to move to Postgres or some other database solution. And doing this is going to be fairly easy because of migrations and the abstraction that Django offers. What exactly do I mean by that? Well, you're not going to be writing to SQLite 3 directly, rather you're going to be using an ORM, an object relational mapper. And this is going to take Python objects and relate those to entries in the database, rows in the database. That means the database layer can be switched out for another relational database fairly easily, and you don't have to change all of your code. This is really the paradise for a software developer who doesn't want to work with SQL directly. You can do everything inside of Python, and you're left with just plain Python code, but you're able to work with a database at the same time. Pretty fabulous. It does require a little bit of extra learning with migrations and how to create these models, but once you get it figured out, it's pretty good. So let's go ahead and create a basic model to represent a movie. You can think of the model as the columns of a table. So we're not creating an individual movie at this point. We're just describing the structure of what a movie looks like, and that's going to create the movies table for us. So what we're going to do is inside of our app directory, we're going to create a new file called models.py. So first thing inside of this movies directory, the naming there is important. And what we're going to do is we're going to create a class to describe our movies structure, but it's going to inherit from something that already exists. So we're going to say from django.db import models. And what we're going to inherit from, and I'll show you how to do this, you say class movie, and inside of parentheses, you say what you want to inherit from, which is going to be models.model there with a capital M, and typically our class is going to have a capital M as well. Now inside of this class, all we need to do is create some attributes for a movie, such as a title and a year. And what we do is we assign the data type to this. The way we do that is by saying models dot, and you can see there's some options here such as integer field. There's also a char field which we can use. This is for characters, and we'll say max length and assign that the value 200. We're going to do something similar for the year by saying models dot integer field, and you could set a default here. So for example 1990 or 0. We'll just leave it blank, so we're not going to default to any value. We'll hit save. So we created a model, and the way this is different than just a typical class is that it inherits from models.model, and we define it in a models.py file. The only other change that we need to do, if you haven't already, is inside of settings.py, make sure you have your app in this installed apps thing. This is how our migrations are going to work. So we're going to create a migration, which is basically telling Django, yo dude, we changed our data model. So go ahead and apply those changes. So to do that, what we do is say Python manage.py, make migrations, and then the name of our app, which is movies. Hit enter, and you can see migrations for movies and create model movie. That's a summary of what happened, and this is the name of that file. So you can see that over here inside of this new migrations directory, and here it is. So you can see it's a little bit different than what we originally created. This is going to describe the changes of the data structure. You don't necessarily have to be able to read this. So we can X out of that. This is going to be changed into SQL. If you want to see what that looks like, you can say Python manage.py, SQL migrate, and then the app name movies, and then the migration number, which is prefixed here. So 0001, we can type that right here, 0001, hit enter, and you can see this brings us back some SQL. You can see create table, movies movie with an ID field. We didn't even define that. It did that for us automatically. It's auto increment. We've got a title. We have a year. And this is something you don't have to issue this SQL migrate command. It doesn't do anything. It just allows us to see that SQL if we want to see what's going to happen when we apply this migration. So let's go ahead and apply the migration. Python manage.py migrate. Hit enter. Applying all migrations, including for the movies app, and you can see it applied this one here. Okay. If you wanted to specify a specific app, you would just put that at the end. So we could say movies here. Either one works. If you're working with multiple apps and you need to specify which one you're talking about, you can just put that name there. Otherwise, it'll just apply all migrations that haven't been already applied. So at this point, we have a table for our movies. And you're just going to have to trust me, bro, because you can't easily see that table until we add that table to the admin page so we can easily see the data. So let's talk about how to add a table to the admin site. You can see by default when we go to the admin site, it doesn't add all of our new tables here. So what we do is in our files, we can create a new file inside of our app movies called admin.py. And in here, we're going to describe what tables we want to show up in our admin site. So in here, we're going to have to import two things. So from .models, the current directory, import the models file, import movie, the model we created. And we're also going to say from Django.contrib, import admin, which is how we get a reference to the admin page. And all we do is say admin.site.register and pass in our model that we created, movie. Now I had to reference this, so I don't have this memorized, but this is exactly the process you'll do to add your model to the admin site. Give it a save. Let's go back, do a quick refresh. We don't see anything there, so this is actually going to execute on server startup. So let's close out of this and restart our server. Now let's go back, do a quick refresh, and there you go. You can see our movies database right here. So we can open that and see all of our movies, currently none. We can add a movie and you can see we have a title and a year. So just to test it out, let's add it, Jaws, and I'm gonna actually look up when Jaws was published. 1974. So let's go back, put 1974. And save. Perfect. So when we look at our movies table, you'll see it says movie object, but doesn't really give a good description of that movie. So we can actually change the string representation of our object. To do that, we're going to override a method inside of our model, and that is the __str___ method. We'll take self as an argument so we can refer to these attributes on the object instance. And we're going to return a string, and we can do an F string so that we can fill in some information such as self.title, and let's say self.year. That should do the trick. Now when we save it and go back, do a refresh, we actually get the string representation of that object, Jaws from 1974. So whenever we print our object, that's what's going to show up. So at this point, you understand how to create a new model class, and you understand how to add data through the admin site. So now I want to actually retrieve all of our movies and display them on our web page. So we need to go back to our view and our template to change them and display real movie data, not just the mock data we were using earlier. So we'll start in our views.py file. Here's the mock data we were working with earlier. But now what I want to do is I actually want to retrieve this data from the database. We can do that inside of this function, so whenever we request all of the movies, we can issue a method on our model, but we need to actually import the model. So from .models, import movie. And here we can issue movie dot objects and then dot all. So that's the method. We just need to assign it to a variable such as data. Hit save. So now the variable data refers to all of the movie objects, and we're going to pass that to the template just the same. So let's see where that gets us. We'll go over to our website and visit movies, and we get an error. Context must be a dict rather than query set. So a simple fix for this is to add the return to a dictionary. So we'll just wrap this in a dictionary. So it's going to look a little bit like this. So we have the data attribute, and it refers to all of the movie objects. So we'll save that, do a quick refresh, and we're getting there. We don't have anything showing up in our template, but we are successfully passing that data to the template. Taking a look at our template, I think this is just a naming mismatch where previously we were using movies instead of data. So let me just go ahead and change that to movies. Going back, quick refresh, and now we get the value JAWS. Awesome, it's working. Let's add a few more pieces of data. Let's go to the admin page, go into movies, add a movie. We'll add that one, add one more. Okay, cool. So we added our original mock data, but we put it in our database, and we should easily see that data on the movies page right there. Now the next logical step is to be able to click each one of these to go to a more details page to get all the stuff you might want to know about that movie. So let's talk about how to do that now. And this is going to require some parameters in the URL. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a new view. Last time we created the path first, now we're going to create the view first and go back and create the path. So we'll just call this detail, and we're going to follow a very similar pattern to this one up here. So we're going to return render, pass the request back, and then the actual template is going to be movies/detail.html. And what are we going to pass back for the data? Well, instead of movies, we're going to say movie. And now let's get this data. So we'll say movie.objects.get. And to say which movie we want to get, we can ask for a certain primary key based on this variable ID, which is actually going to come in as extra data to this view. So how is this going to get to the view? Well, that's all going to come from the URLs. So let's visit the URLs page, and we're going to create a new path. And this is going to be movies/ and then inside of lesser than greater than signs, we're going to say int ID. And it's going to go to views.detail. So when you visit movies/ and pass in some ID, it's going to go to this detail page. So let's visit that page. It's not going to work right now because we don't have that template, but let's just see it. So go to movie/1. Template does not exist. And you can see all the directories that it searched for, including templates movies/detail. So let's go ahead and make that template just like the other template. So we'll go into movies, new file, detail.html, and let's just go ahead and display the movie. That's just going to give all the movie information, and you can see JAWS from 1974. Cool. So what we could do is, if you imagine this JAWS having ID 1, this ID 2, and this ID 3, and you click on JAWS, it goes to movie/1. You click on Sharknado, it goes to movie/2, and so forth. Well, what we could do is we could basically just make these links where the URL is the ID of whatever element we're working with. So let's see if that's possible. Let's talk about how to make IDs in the URL. So we'll go over to the movies.html, and inside of the list item, we'll create an anchor tag, enclose the anchor tag, and then put an href here. And for now, let's just do a pound. And just to confirm that the links work, so these are all links now. They don't go anywhere, but work in progress. So using the template engine, we can replace this pound sign with some rendered value coming from movie.id. Since the whole movie object is passed to this page, we should be able to access that as we iterate through the elements. Now, when we go to the page and do a quick refresh, hovering over these, you can see the links down in the bottom. We have movies 1, 2, and 3. And we can click any of these to get the full details for that movie. Now, if you want a little bit more research, you can remove hard-coded URLs and namespace URLs. We're not going to be talking about that in this video, but overall, it's not too bad of a process. That'll just help if you end up moving your application around. You don't have to worry about fixing so many links. But our application is pretty simple. We just have like one link repeated 3 times, so not a big deal. You can imagine a link here to add a movie, which brings up a form. You can fill in the movie information, the title and the year, and it will add it to this list. As for deleting a movie, you can imagine open one of these up, and there is a delete button, which will then remove it from the list. So to get started, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new path to create a movie. So this is going to be movies/add. And the view this is going to hit will be views.add. Now to actually access this URL from the web page, we're going to want to add a link here. Inside of movies.html, after the unordered list, we can add an anchor tag, and we'll just say add a movie, and we'll make the path for this to be /movies/add. All right, let's check it out, do a refresh, make sure the link is right, and it's broken, so let's check what we did wrong. Movies.views has no attribute add. All right, that makes sense. So it's basically complaining that this doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and add that function real quick. Def add request, and we will just return a render passing in the request and then the template. So it'll be movies/add.html. We'll create that template in a sec because I think this will work, at least give us an error. So the path is /movies/add, and it says template does not exist. So we're on the right track. All we got to do is create that template, and you guys know how to do that. We'll go into our movies template directory, say new file, add.html. Now, it doesn't matter how many times I create a form in HTML, I always forget the exact setup, so I might get this wrong on the first attempt, but it's going to look something like this. We're going to say form, and a form will have an action, which is where we want it to be sent to. So this we can actually use the same path, so we'll say movies add, and the method is going to be post. And the form is going to need an input, and for this, it's going to say type, submit, and the value, which is what shows up on the button, will be add. All right, let's save that and just see what happens. Do a quick refresh. We have this giant add button here. Let's go ahead and now add in a few inputs. So it'll look like input type equals, we can say text, and for this we are going to set the name, and we'll just say the title as well as the ID, which will also be the title. And then there's a little trick you can do with HTML5 if we want to put a value here. So you have two different options. The one you'll often see is value, and just for example we'll say movie title, and when you do this you'll see movie title here. However, it's not very friendly. Like, you have to go in and delete this. So you can actually use, instead of value, placeholder. So now we have movie title, and when we type, it disappears. So that's a much better user experience. Additionally, you can do a label, which should look something like this, where you'll say label, and inside of here we'll have an attribute for, which is for the title input, and you can say movie title like this. All right, let's do a quick refresh, see how it looks. You can see movie title with the text here. So either one, you could have both even. I'm just going to remove the label, and I'm going to copy this input and paste it another time, just changing some of the info. So this one is going to be year, as well as this one here, year, and we'll change this to movie year. All right, so pretty simple, pretty basic form, but I think it should work. So we could say something like test 1, 2, 3, 4, hit add, and we get this thing CSRF verification failed. This refers to cross-site request forgery. Now, because we're making a request to the same URL, Django has something that will allow this to work, and all you have to do is include a cross-site request forgery token, and it's going to look like this. You'll just say CSRF _token. We'll just try this again. All right, and it looks like we didn't get the cross-site request forgery issue this time. Now, this add view is actually going to be used for the view page when you add a movie, but it's also going to be the view that accepts the data that's typed in here, because if you look over at add.html, the action is where that data is sent. So it's going to be sent to movies/add with a method known as post. So what we could do is inside of our view, we can check to see if that data was sent here. And if it was, then we know that the person was trying to send in a movie. So how do you actually get that data? It's going to be a little bit different than what you see here because we're creating a post request. So instead, what we're going to do is say request.post, and then we're going to get a value out of that dictionary. And the thing we're looking for is called title. And then we're going to do that again for the year. So we'll just assign these to variables. Let's say this first one here is title, and this second one here is the year. So if you didn't catch that, let me just repeat that one more time. This is a post request, which is a little bit different than a GET request. A GET request is when, for example, you visit a web page, you select one of these. We're making a GET request to movies with the parameterized value of 1. And that's what's attached to this ID in this detail view. In a post request, that information is not attached to the URL, but is instead sent with the request body. So we might be able to see that inside of Chrome's developer tools. So let's just say test 1, 2, 3, 4. But before we hit submit, let's actually open up this network tab and we'll hit add. And you can see this is our request. So if we go over to headers here, this is the URL. And then the payload is what we actually sent. And it contains 2 important things for this movie, the title and the year. So if you want to get this information from the payload, the extra stuff sent in the request body, you do that with request.post. And this is a dictionary, so you can use .get to access any element. So to grab the key with the word title in it, you would say .get title. And that's going to return the value test. All right, so that's enough on get and post. You can do more research on the different request types. There are others such as put and delete, but the most common you're going to see is get and post. So we get these values, and the get method on a dictionary does not throw an exception if that doesn't exist. So even if we're just accessing this add view for the first time and we don't have any post data, it's not going to throw an exception and break our page. That's why I prefer to use get over using square brackets, because you could use square brackets like this, and that would work the same. However, if title doesn't exist, it's going to throw an exception. So you would need to put this all inside of a try, which I don't really want to have to deal with. So I prefer to use .get. So we're going to get the title. And now what we can do is we can just check to see if those both have values. So if title and year, what we're going to do is we're going to create a movie object. So movie is a new movie. We're going to pass in the title, which is equal to the title variable we have up there. And we're going to pass in the year, which is equal to the year variable we have up here. So we have a movie object, but it doesn't automatically get saved to the database until we invoke movie.save. So we invoke this save method on our movie object. After this is done, we added it to the database. What we want to do is redirect back to the list of movies. And you can do that with return HTTP response redirect, and then pass in a path such as movies. So we're probably going to have to import this. So from django.http, import HTTP response redirect. So we'll add that in there, and you can see that up here. All right, so far so good. Let's give it a try. Save, and let's visit all of our movies. So we'll just start from scratch here. We'll add a movie, and it looks like I have a typo. I'm sorry, as I was dorking around showing you guys how to use get versus square brackets, I forgot to put this post back in there. So I think that'll fix it. Let's go ahead and refresh. Movie title, test, 1, 2, 3, 4, add. It takes us back to the movies page, and you can see that test movie is right there. Let's try it again. Test 2, 1995. We'll hit add, And the links for these should automatically work, so we can open up test 2 and see that it's from 1995. That's a bare bones example of how you can add data. What I want to do now is show how you can delete data. So for this, imagine there being a delete button in here, and this is going to be in the details page. So let's go over to detail.html. And right now we're not doing any fancy HTML. We can split this out if you want. So for example, we'll just have a paragraph movie.title, and then again for the year, so movie.year. Do a quick refresh to make sure I don't break anything. So I got test 2, 1995, and then let's go ahead and add a link down here as well. So we'll create the anchor tag and we'll just say delete. Href, where is this going to go? Well, we could do just like we did with the ad. We could just create a delete view, and that could be at /movies/delete. And then we're going to actually pass in the ID of the movie. So we'll say movie.id. All right, let's check this out. Hovering over delete, you can see we have /movies/delete/11 down in the bottom corner. And we click this and it's trying to go to that page. So now we have the URL on the front end for the template. Now we just have to update the URLs and the views. So we'll say path movie/delete is going to go to views.delete. So we should be able to create that as a function here inside of our views. Def delete. It's going to take a request. And this one's actually going to have that ID as well. So that needs to be passed in as a parameter here, similar to when we get the movie details. So we'll say /int ID. All right, so that's going to be that last part of the URL, the 11 in this case, or whatever the ID you're working with is. So we can access that in our view with this parameter here. All right, so the way you delete is you say movie, and we actually need to get that element. So we're going to say objects.get pk is equal to the ID. And now that we have that object, this here is going to return it. We can invoke another method on that object .delete. And there we go. That's how you delete a movie. And then we'll just go back to the main page. So we'll say return HTTP response redirect, and we're going to go to /movies. That should be it. Let's check it out. We will do a quick refresh here. We'll visit a movie. We have test 1, 2, 3, 4 and delete. We click delete and it's gone. So we're able to delete movies now. What happens if something goes wrong? We haven't really done any error checking. So let's talk about returning 404s. So let's go back to our page and let's say we want to delete, and we just pass in an ID here that doesn't exist, like 39. Well, we get an error here. It does not exist. So when we pass in that ID to get here, well, it's breaking, and then, yeah, it's broken. So we can't delete that element. It's very descriptive. It's breaking, and then it's broken. So the solution to this is, instead of deleting this right away, what we're going to do is we're going to save this object in a variable movie. And now that we have that object in this variable, we can always delete it later if we need. That is if there is no errors. So the way we check for errors is you can create a try. So anything inside of this try, if there is an exception thrown, we can catch that exception. So to do that, we say except, and inside of the except, what we can do is we can raise HTTP 404 and put a message like movie does not exist. So let's go ahead and import this HTTP 404 from django.http. And now if we make it past this point, that means no exceptions were thrown and we didn't return a 404, which, by the way, 404 means not found. So at this point, we could say movie.delete. Let's try this out. We'll go back to our page. We'll refresh this page and it says page not found 404. Which is a more appropriate response. And then if we delete one that does exist, let's go ahead and go back to the movies page. We'll go ahead and delete Sharknado. You can see it still works. So if we go ahead and delete one that doesn't exist, let's go back to that error page there for a second. So we'll say delete 39. You can see page not found. You're seeing this error because you have debug equal to true in your Django settings file. So when you deploy your site, you're not going to see this page. well, you shouldn't, because the debug should be set to false in deployment. So let's go ahead and see what that looks like. If we go into settings.py and search debug, you can see debug is true. We'll go ahead and set that to false, give it a save, and you get this error. You must set settings.allowedhost if debug is false. So for this, we'll just add localhost. Let's go ahead and restart the server. All right, there we go. Now let's do a refresh, and we get bad request 400. So this means something went wrong. Not entirely sure what the problem is. So let me just go ahead and put this back to true. We might need to restart the server. Okay, so the host is incorrect. So we need to add this, the loopback address, instead of localhost. So let's go ahead and paste that here. Let's see what happens now. Page not found. All right, and now let's set debug to false. And we'll do a refresh. Not found. The requested resource was not found on this server. There we go. So that is going to be the result of trying to access a page in deployment when debug is set to false. You can customize the 404 page. However, we're not going to get into that in this video. So this is where I'm going to end the video. There's of course a lot more you can study, much of which I'm going to be covering in my upcoming course. So if you want to know, for example, I haven't finished the course yet, so subject to change, but I'm looking at covering dynamic URLs, templating our templates, so extending templates, that way you can have a consistent theme across your website, and reduce repeating code, more complex structure to our data, as well as working with other databases and NoSQL, deploying our application, and there's like so many other things that I want to cover. And in fact, this video is much longer than I was originally intending because I just kept doing stuff. But I think this is a pretty good stopping point because at this point you have essentially all of the capabilities of CRUD, which is create, read, update, and delete. We did not implement update. However, our data is so simple, an update is just a delete followed by a new create. But you could create a form to actually change the data for a movie, and that would be the update capability. So if you're looking for your next challenge, that's what it can be. And that can be useful if you have more complex data and you don't want to have to recreate it. You know, if you have 10 things you have to fill out, it'd be nice if you could just go in there and change one of them. This one makes sense for, you know, if someone wants to edit a user profile, or if you want to edit movie information, whatever it might be, the update is very important. Now,